For Minnesota farmers, no good yield goes unpunished. Last year at this time, we brought you the last harvest, a look at how farmers struggled through a perfect storm of bad weather, low prices, and a trade war. Many got through it, but this year wasn't the comeback many expected. Here's Tom Lydon.
For Minnesota farmers, it seems like there's always a storm somewhere on the horizon. But for Dave Westhoff, who farms near Belle Plaine in Scott County, this year's harvest brought a sigh of relief and something he hasn't felt in years: optimism.
So you go forward, you put your best foot forward and hope for the best at the end of the year, and this is one of those years where we're going to get a good crop.
After the wettest year on record in Minnesota, growing conditions this year were pretty ideal. Corn and soybean yields are up 5 to 10%, and commodity prices stayed relatively high because of the pain to our south. The derecho that swept through Iowa damaged half the state's corn and soybean crop. Iowa's misery was Minnesota's gain. Westhoff also raises pigs, and the supply chain problem due to COVID outbreaks in meatpacking plants have, for the most part, smoothed out. Minnesota's meat exports, mostly pork and mostly to China, were up 44% last month. And yet, those storm clouds are still out there.
Things have gotten a lot worse.
Dave Hess is a farmer near Comfrey. He's also a farm advocate with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, counselors who provide one-on-one assistance to farmers facing financial hardships. He's been at this since the last farm crisis in the 1980s and says he's never had a busier or more depressing year.
Desperate. They're desperate. I mean, to the point of even getting food on the table. Is still set for Wednesday.
Hess says many banks are now calling in their loans, not interested in refinancing or extending credit. Hess has been on the phone nonstop, negotiating between lenders and farmers. A ringing phone doesn't bother him. The silence does.
I get a little bit concerned when all of a sudden I don't hear from somebody. And I've got one right now that I have not, almost on a daily basis. I think about him and his 6 children.
If you were highly leveraged coming into this year's not going to save you.
Steve Zank is also a farm advocate near Renville. He says the banks and lenders are looking at the horizon too.
And they've just about come to the end of where they want to keep investing in some of these folks. They just don't see a scenario for them to get out from under this.
But before it comes to foreclosure, Minnesota law requires a 90-day mediation period between the farmer and the lender. The legislature extended that deadline until December 1st. Last year, nearly 3,000 farmers entered mediation. This year, more than 2,400. And farm bankruptcies, known as Chapter 12, are on pace to exceed last year.
For farmers, it almost always could be worse. And this year almost certainly would have been if not for a different kind of rainmaker: federal farm subsidies. Those federal payouts will account for 40% of total farm income this year. Think about that, 40%. It's hard to imagine another sector of our economy that's so heavily subsidized. And yet, not everyone is getting the same slice of the pie.
Between MFP and the new coronavirus food assistance program and traditional farm subsidies, this year is going to be the largest year for farm subsidies ever in the history of the United States.
And Weir Scheckinger is a senior economic analyst for the Environmental Working Group, which tracks farm subsidies. A total of $46 billion is expected to go to American farmers. Minnesota getting nearly $2 billion, much of that through the Market Facilitation Program, or MFP, meant to help farmers get through the trade war with China. Since the payments are based on acreage, the bigger the farm, the bigger the subsidy, regardless of need or economies of scale. And while there is a cap on payments, multiple members of a family can collect a subsidy. Break down those numbers, and you find the largest farms, the top 1%, got 16% of the money. The average payment for the big guys, more than $500,000.
Did this market facilitation program actually help farmers get through this trade war?
So just the fact that most of this money has gone to the largest farms really shows that the small guys who struggle the most with economic downturns, like what happened with crop prices because of the trade war with China, it means that those guys aren't the ones getting most of the money.
Despite all those subsidies, farmers still find themselves going deeper and deeper into debt. There's more than $434 billion in debt in the farm sector, much of it tied to buying and leasing land. That debt is expected to go up by 4% this year. And yet those subsidies are also keeping farmers like Westhoff out of the red.
Yeah, I'm not embarrassed of it. I feel like we're making fairly decent marketing decisions. We've kept our machinery budget in line. And yes, regardless of the size of the farmer, that's a very true statement across the board that without the government payments, without the federal payments that we've been receiving, that you would be at or below the cost of production.
For many farmers, federal subsidies are still the difference between calling it quits and one more harvest. But you have to wonder how long such a system is sustainable and whether those payments will still be there when the next storm rolls through. For the Fox 9 investigators, I'm Tom Lydon.
Now, lenders we talk with say they're working with farmers and are more flexible these days in coming up with solutions for those farmers. If you're a producer who is going through a stressful time, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture has several resources to help and a 24/7 hotline. To connect, go to the Fox 9 app and look for tonight's story by Tom.